I think the biggest thing is for manufacturers and brands to commit to long-term purchasing orders or
Mm.
offtakes, because that is what really moves the needle forward for companies like us. I think it's for like the longest time, so many of these companies, like startups like us, have been just stuck in like the capsule collection stage, and it's great for PR, it's great for the brand, but at the end of the day, for the startup, we usually do it at cost, and sometimes you even lose money during that, and we don't have a lot of money,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's hard, honestly. And so until like those large purchasing orders that are committed to like 10 years committed, or at least like 5 years committed, that really like moves the needle forward, and it also allows a company like us to get larger funding,
Hmm.
because with just small commitments like a couple kilograms or like 100 garments, it's still very hard to make a profit out of that.
In a recent report by the Changing Markets Foundation, synthetic fibers account for 69% of textile production globally, both within fashion and, of course, the larger soft goods space. These are usually fossil fuel derived fibers, meaning that they're co products of the oil industry. They create microplastics. In fact, around 20 to 30% of microplastics in the ocean today are textile derived, mainly through the washing of garments and the production of garments and the dyeing of garments and things of this nature, right? So they represent a huge problem. They pose a serious threat to our environment, and textile production, weaving, and dyeing of a garment represent an outsized portion of a garment's environmental impact. And so that's what we're going to start the story off with, right? At the basic element, it's fiber. With most of our textiles coming from synthetics and the rest coming from water intensive crops like cotton, it makes the bulk of the garment's environmental impact. And so it's very important that we address these and think about material innovation. Now, we start with a company that's addressing the need for performance and variability in textiles at the fiber level, all without the need for fossil fuel derived textiles or resource intensive crops. Valentina Gomez is a co founder of Werewool. It's a biomaterials company that develops fibers with tailored aesthetics and performance properties derived from natural proteins found in nature. This creates plug and play options for the textile and fashion industry at large without the need for those synthetics or traditionally resource intensive crops. Material innovation has been getting a lot of attention recently, rightfully so, because of the outsized environmental impact that this segment has in our garment productions. But what really makes Werewool specifically unique amongst all the other innovators is the ability to customize and design properties of a fiber that otherwise traditional materials can't create. Well, Valentina, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this podcast. We're really excited to have you. Before we jump in, I'd love for you to give a bit of a background of yourself and of Werewool as a company.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Valentina. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO at Werewool. My background is in textile development and marketing. I went to FIT, and I graduated in 2020. And a bit about myself. I started my career in textiles, or like my life in textiles started from like a very young age. My family owned and operated
Hmm.
a denim mill in Colombia, and so
Oh,
growing
cool.
up, I used to spend a lot of time in the factory with my dad and my older
Yeah.
brother, and it was really cool to have that upbringing for me because I just got to see like the manufacturing from
Mm,
like a very early age, and I also got to like travel to really cool countries with my dad to go buy like denim and stuff when I was like 10 years old.
that's cool.
And
That's
so
cool.
naturally, when I was 18 and I like was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for college, I knew I wanted to like work in textiles or some sort of like fashion industry. And I saw that FIT had this really cool program called Textile Development,
Mm,
and that for like the graduation capstone project, they had creating a denim brand. And so I was like, okay, this thing was made for me. I really would love to go to the school. And so
yeah.
I joined that program in 2016, was when I started college. Um, and during my like 4 years of college, it really like opened my eyes in a like a good way, but also a very sad way for myself. How polluting the fashion industry truly is, and all of the impacts that it
Mm-hmm.
has on human health, biodiversity, and just the world in general. And in
Mm-hmm.
2018, I went to India for a study abroad program. And it was a study
Awesome.
abroad program. Yeah, it was really, really, really cool. It was a study abroad program that focused on sustainable textile artisans, and
Okay.
how they produce fabrics using like old like techniques, so such as like block printing, hand embroidery, a lot of natural
Mm-hmm.
dyes, and that was where I met my co-founder Chewy, which is a really funny way of meeting your co-founder is in India. But we both were very aligned on just how we were super frustrated with the industry, and seeing like the pollution
Mm-hmm.
and and the smog in India like really
Mm-hmm.
like made that
It's
a
really
very
bad.
concrete thing for us just to experience it
Mm-hmm.
firsthand. Like we landed in Delhi and we were supposed to have 3 days there, and we had to leave right away because some of the students were having trouble breathing and were getting headaches because they just aren't used to dealing with that in the US. We're very separated from how it is in these other countries. Um, and a lot of it is from a result of the production that we get here. All of the clothes, it's all made over there, and we don't really see like the impact that it's having on those other sides of the world, and it's very sad. Um, and so when we got back from India after being there for about a month, we joined the Biodesign Challenge program, and that's a program, it's a really, really cool program. There's a couple really cool companies that have spun out of there, such as Kill Labs and Tomtex. And it's a university
Sick.
program. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a university, like, it's like a extracurricular, like, challenge sort of thing. And it like introduces like non-traditional
Mm-hmm.
science students to biology and biotech, and like what your industry could look like if you look to these other sorts of industries for inspiration. And through that program that year, Stella McCartney had proposed an animal free wool challenge. And we had a mentor who was he's a molecular florist, which is really cool. He engineers flowers to have properties that they don't naturally have in nature. So like really cool
Mm-hmm.
colors, just really fascinating field. And
Yeah.
he introduced us to biotech and the world of proteins, and just how in nature proteins have all these incredible functional properties. They give organisms their beautiful colors, they give them fluorescent properties, they give them moisture management, it allows for like our skin to stretch, all these really amazing properties. And for us it was like, wow, these are all these things that we want from our textiles and we require from our clothing. But traditionally,
Mm-hmm.
we get these through really harsh chemicals, really harsh processes, a lot of water
Mm-hmm.
usage, a lot of plastics. And that was like the deep rabbit hole that led us to creating Werewool.
When I hear stories like yours, what really excites me is this sort of natural evolution, right? Sort of these reference points from your childhood that sort of sparked this, planted that seed for the direction that you're going in, and then just through a series of life scenarios, just come together into this one thing that that just sort of like a light bulb moment. Obviously, there's ups and downs to that entire journey, but you came into this program, and what was, besides the environmental impact that you saw in India and the impact that it had on people, what was something that you took away from it from a materials perspective or from a production perspective? Was there anything that what was the biggest learning outcome from that trip?
From being in India.
India, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was really cool to see that like these ancient practices that have been
Mm-hmm.
going for hundreds and thousands of years are still being used today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like natural dyes have been around forever, like these forms of block printing, and like because like traditionally we get most print, like I have this fabric here, like it's like through screen printing, and it's like very different chemicals that are traditionally used for this. But like the way that they do block printing there, a lot of it, and like the mud resist printing, A lot of that is just done with like natural things. And it gives you this a very similar end product. Maybe it's not the perfect like thing that we usually look for, like something that's thousands and millions of the same like look. It has its own like special touch, but and each garment and every single piece of fabric is a little bit different. But that was like a really cool like takeaway for me, was because I had a couple internships and jobs where when you're doing like textile production, like everything just has to be the same and it has to be perfect. And like you have to have thousands of like the same like little image in like the same little corner. And it was like embracing just the really cool practice of like the human touch, and like how you can create things that don't have to be perfect, but you also have to embrace that in a way, and it's still beautiful art and beautiful fabrics.
To go off of that, then how does Werewool address that? I think you make a really good point about the handmade feel of a lot of these ancient practices that are ubiquitous, especially in regions like India and in Asia. But how does Werewool respond to the demand of modern fashion houses that require ubiquity? You require the same on scale. How does Werewool's business and product really address that?
Yeah, I think that's like something really cool about proteins is that so our first product right now is focused on color. So we can create fibers with inherent color, and that color is attributed to our designer proteins that we grow in our bacterias. And we always will get the same color. It just, and you can get different shades depending on like the concentration of the protein, but we always get the same color. It's like the color matching is always the same, which is really cool. It's not like when you go through like the traditional dyeing, you'll end up getting like a bunch of swatches sent back from the mill, and you have to like use your light box to make sure that the color is the exact one that you ask for. But with these proteins, the DNA sequence is what is attributed to these colors. And so if you always just insert the same bacteria, this protein, you always end up with the same color. So there isn't that issue of color matching now.
Gotcha. So just so that our audience is going to be really clear about this, there's larger differences between protein-based textiles and other type of cellulose-based textiles, like a cotton or hemp versus a wool or cashmere or silk. What you're producing is comparable to a wool, cashmere, or silk. It's a protein-based fiber, but you're creating it in a lab. So where does the textile comes from the fibers? Where do the fibers come from, and how are you producing that out of this process that you've created?
Yeah, so these proteins that give our fibers like the inherent color and the performance properties, they make up like less than 2% of the composition. So the bulk of our fiber is plant-based protein, and a small percentage of a polysaccharide. And so since it is a plant-based protein, it still gives us like a similar, right now it gives us a similar mechanical properties to something like a wool, and the similar like tensile strength, the similar stretch as well as a wool. But that's because of the bulk biopolymer is a plant-based protein that can be sourced from ag waste.
Gotcha. Oh, really? So
Yeah.
one thing that I'm curious about is finding all these variables, finding all these natural, let's say DNA sequences or proteins that you can reference to find those different colors. You want a pink, where do you go out to find that pink? Where do you go out to find that yellow? And how do they all have to be from animal based, or are you able to sequence a color from a plant?
It's fascinating, really. So scientists have been working on this since the 70s. So like the first DNA sequence for color that was identified came from a jellyfish. And like that's like
Mm.
that green fluorescent protein that's used in the biomedical field for a very, very long time. It's traditionally been used as like a biomarker. So if you end up with like something that's inside your body and then they need to take it out later, they'll use that as a biomarker, so it's easy for them to find it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so people have been working on this since the 70s, and there's
Wow.
tens of millions, hundreds of millions of these DNA sequences that are readily available. So it's essentially like a library of these properties. And there's really cool just websites on the internet where you can look for this. And
Mm.
so what we do is that we identify the function that we're looking for. So let's say in our case, we are looking to express this pink color that we have in our fibers. And traditionally that pink color, this like red fluorescent protein, is found in a discosoma coral. So scientists have done this for a long time. They like identified the DNA sequence that attributes for that color. And
Mm-hmm.
then we grab that DNA sequence and we go through an extensive round of engineering on it. Because traditionally these proteins, they are very sensitive to UV, they're very sensitive to temperature, they're very sensitive to pH. And as you know, textiles go through a lot of harsh processing, a lot of high temperatures, a lot of different pHs
Mm-hmm.
where like the body sweats. There's a lot of different things it has to go through. So we engineer those proteins to be able to withstand a lot of those high temperatures and a lot of those different pHs.
Before we jump too much into the scientific and environmental impact of your business, I would love to understand how you guys sort of formulated as a company. I know you and your partner had met while going through this study abroad program in India, and you guys went through this incubator. Tell me about that light bulb moment when you decided to go for this, or rather, you knew that you had a viable business moving forward. You decided to then go get funding, or just evolve the business moving forward. Can you tell us about that journey that you guys went on?
Yeah. So I guess I can start from when we went through the biodesign challenge and
Yeah.
then from there on. Yeah, so 2018, we did the biodesign challenge. Funny enough, we didn't win. We got best presentation, but we decided to keep going because we were super interested in the potential of the technology itself.
Yeah.
And so we kept going. Our mentor, the molecular florist that I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
he let us work in his kitchen lab for about a year,
Interesting.
and he
His
mentored
kitchen lab.
us. Yeah, he had a lab in his apartment in Long Island City, and it's like such a fascinating place. But his
Yeah,
whole
I can
apartment
imagine.
was essentially a lab. He had his own bedroom where like there was no lab stuff in there, but everything
Yeah,
else was very much a lab.
that's cool.
And so he let us work there for a year. He mentored us. He like taught us how to do like all that engineering, how to express proteins, how to purify proteins,
Mhm.
which was really cool. He let us like sleep on his like bedroom floor, like just overnight because we were trying to just delve into all the science that was not really our background.
Yeah.
And so we worked on it for about a year, and we like proved out some of the data. We kept going, and then our professor at FIT, Thean Shiros, she's our scientific co-founder.
Mhm.
um, she has an appointment at Columbia, and we're like, hey, we've been working on this, like this is the data that we have now. We want to take it further, but we've also kind of hit our limitation as to like what we can do about it.
Mhm.
Can you help us out? And she brought us over to Columbia, where we partnered up with the biomedical engineering lab of Helen Liu and the chemical engineering lab of Ali Obermeyer. Both of them are also scientific co-founders now as well.
Mhm.
And we worked in their lab for about a year and a half. And we got a small grant through the NSF where we were able to work with like a couple postdocs and some of their PhD students. And then COVID hit in 2020. So that was when I went back to Florida. I was
Yeah, what
living
did
with
that
my
do to
brother.
your plan?
Yeah. Yeah, it moved things around a little bit because our labs at Columbia closed. We
I
couldn't
can
go
imagine.
anymore. But then in April
Uh,
2020, like right in April 2020 was when we won the H&M Foundation's Global Change Prize. And that was what like kicked us off completely. It
Sure.
was like our like holy shit moment, because we were like,
Mhm.
wow, like one of the biggest manufacturers in the world is interested in what we were doing. And they gave us a 250,000 euro check to start off. And it was a grant, so like not dilutive or any of
Yeah.
that. So once that kicked in, we started a 1-year accelerator program with them, and with the other 4 companies as well that had won the prize. And that was amazing because we got to meet a lot of the brands within the group. So they own companies like COS, Arket,
Yeah.
just a lot of different companies. And so we
The
got to
whole
like
H&M group. Yeah.
so we got to understand like a lot of like stakeholders through the supply chain. They introduced us to a lot of mills. They introduced us to a lot of other brands as well. And so we were in that program for a year. And with the money, we rented out a community lab in Brooklyn called Gen Space. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a really,
Mhm.
really cool space. They like teach people that are interested in biology how to like
Oh, awesome.
engineer bacteria and do all of that. And like you don't have to have like a scientific background. They're a really awesome space. But since they are a community lab, they couldn't offer classes during COVID. And so they were
Hmm.
a little bit going through it. And so with 2 other companies, we rented out their lab space for about a year, and we continued working there.
Okay.
Um,
Amazing.
and then about a year later, we decided to start fundraising, because things were moving very slowly. We were still operating on grants. And
Yeah.
yeah, we wanted to kick things up. And
Totally.
the fundraising process was a huge learning curve for us. We didn't have any background in it. We're textile fashion people. And so
Mhm.
there was a lot of things that we learned through that process. But back in March 2023, we closed our seed round. Um, and we got 3.7 million from 2 amazing investors.
Nice.
One of them is Sofinova. They're based in Paris, very focused in biotech. And then Material Impact, based in Boston. And we've hired a team since then, and it's a complete different sort of company now. We're a team of about 13 now. Um, and our lab is in Brooklyn. We have prototypes now. We have like, I wish I had it with me, but we have like knit swatches now that like feel
Yeah.
great. They're super soft, and like the
Awesome.
pink color is there and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, and now we're fundraising again with the plans to close for
Gotcha.
a $6 million extension soon.
Exciting. Exciting. Well, only the best of luck for you guys, and I think we obviously believe in what you guys are
Thanks.
doing. So I know
Oh,
that a lot
thank
of other people
you.
in the space are excited about what you guys are making as well, um,
Thanks.
because it's really important. Before we go too further into the sustainability space, I want to harper on the personal impact of this very particular part of this of your company's journey. When you're starting out, you're getting initial funding. I mean, did you and your partner initially put in the first bout of money to start this? Did you have to make a lot of financial sacrifices during that time in your life? I mean, this a question I always ask my entrepreneurs on this podcast is, what did you do for health insurance during this time? Because it's for a lot of people, this sort of jump into starting something on your own could result in losing that if you don't have another job, or if you're X, Y, and Z. So I'd love for you to comment on that and share some of those personal experiences.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, we definitely put in some of our money in the beginning. I think lucky enough, Chewy and I, we both have like very supportive families. Whereas, yeah, so like Chewy's partner is an incredible man, and he has supported us a lot through this. And my parents have been there like since the beginning with this. They've like been very supportive. I mean, for my
Nice.
dad, it was also very eye opening for him to like see the true pollution of the industry, and like because he also wasn't aware of it. I don't think that this was something that was talked about until like the
Yeah.
last like decade or so. And so he's been very supportive. And for the first couple of years, my family did support me, and I was under their health insurance till like 2 years ago. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and so I had that family support, and I know that this would have been very difficult without them. But there's always financial sacrifices along this,
Of
but
course.
I think like it goes back to like the mission of the company and like the true potential that you see. Like once it scales, it's going to be all worth it in the end. So
Yeah.
that's what gets you
Well,
through every day.
of course, of course. Well, when you get to that point, I mean, I'd love to understand a little bit more about your business model in terms of, you're creating these innovative materials. You're creating materials with different properties and color sets that are created in a lab instead of having to harm the environment by killing livestock or
Yeah.
harmful farming practices for overuse of water and cotton and things like that. I mean, just to simply put this out for everyone to understand, what is the positive environmental impact of choosing a werewool versus a traditional dyed wool or a silk or cashmere or a spandex for stretch material? I mean, why should we care about you picking a werewool product over something else?
Yeah. I mean, when we started off, we like wanted to create something that holistically addresses the supply chain. So we look at the raw material impact. So we look to regenerative resources to create the fiber
Mm-hmm.
itself. So starting from that impact there and then moving down through the supply chain, since we do build in the inherent color, then we can cut out the dyeing process as well. And then at the end of life, our fibers don't contribute to microplastics, since there aren't any um, plastics in the fiber as well. Um, but I think what's incredible about the potential of the technology is that it is a platform technology. So right now, our first products are looking at cutting out the dyeing process from the supply chain by building on the inherent color. But proteins in nature do incredible things. So right now, we're working on building in inherent stretch in a new product line. So we can create a biodegradable alternative to things like spandex.
Hmm.
And so therefore that allows for fabrics with our fiber to be not blended with like something like a spandex or like something that would give it stretch, which allows for biodegradability to be much simpler, but then also recyclability to be much simpler, because getting that 1% spandex out of like your cotton jeans is almost impossible still. So therefore it makes like your cotton jeans not degrade as easily either. So that's like, yeah, that's where we see like our biggest impacts. And further down the line, we're looking at cutting out some of that performance finishing, which relies on super harsh chemicals to get like a waterproofing. So we're looking to create all those like waterproofing, UV protection, all through protein structure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So all these performance properties that we've come to get, we as consumers, modern apparel, performance apparel, sportswear, X, Y, and whatnot, is based off of these practices, synthetic fibers that leave a lot of um, dirt behind them, and so to say.
Yeah.
And what you do is what you guys are doing is finding ways to address those, create materials that have these properties that we've come to expect, but done so in a way that is natural and non-harmful compared to traditional processes. I think that's amazing, and I love for you just to speak to the idea of material selection in our garments. Obviously, performance materials, the whole performance industry, right, sector of sportswear is based off of these synthetic fibers and spandex and water wicking and things like that, and all these different performance features that come at a very unfortunate negative cost. What advice would you give to the average consumer when it comes to selecting
Yeah.
materials in their garments?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is always like to look at the fabric content of your
Mhm.
garment. It's always going to be inside, and it goes so far. Like for my partner, it's so funny because before he met me, he would just go into a store and just buy whatever looked cool. And then now when he goes into a store, he'll like
Yeah.
immediately check the fiber content and he'll be like, "Oh, this
Nice.
is 100% polyester. Why would I
No.
pay $300 for this?" And I'm just no. And
Perfect.
it's
You're
like,
doing good work, Valentina, there.
yeah, and it's just like it's something that's so simple, but it's such like a important thing for the consumer to do, to like
Hmm.
just not opt into buying these garments that are made of 100% polyester or
Hmm.
100% of nylon, things like that. It like shows to the brand that if the dollars aren't there, it's a big thing for them. I mean, that's everything to them is people buying stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think we're seeing that like there's a lot of really cool brands that do like all cotton or all natural fibers, and they're starting to do really well because consumers are also starting to see that a lot of these like plastics and a lot of these like harsh chemicals affect
Hmm.
them. Like
Hmm.
it is us like consuming plastic in our food is just horrible for us. And then also a lot of these like harsh chemicals, it cause us to have rashes. It like has made eczema become such a much bigger thing. And a
Yeah.
lot of that just comes from looking at like the fiber content and seeing what it is. And you'd be surprised like how your like health can change if you just start wearing natural fibers. It does affect you, even if it's just on top of your skin. It does like leach into your body,
Hmm.
which is such a horrible thing, but it's true.
Yeah.
And it all just goes back to looking at the little tag that's inside.
100%. No, I'm with you on that, and I think there's been a recent study in 2019 about the average like person in America, let's just say, consumes a credit card's worth of plastic a week. A week,
Yeah.
I said, not a month or a year. Like
Yeah.
that's an insane amount of microplastics that we're just absorbing through food, air, clothing, all that stuff, and it's a horrible reality that we live in. Um,
Yeah. It's horrible.
what is the designed end of life state for Werewool's material?
Yeah. So we're actually doing our third party biodegradability studies right now, which is
Hmm.
super exciting to get it done by like a certified lab.
Hmm.
But the way that we create our fibers is by thinking of the end of life since the
Hmm.
beginning. And so all of our inputs should be compostable, not in like specific conditions or anything like how some like bioplastics have to be.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, we don't know where most of our garments end up. We see that they end up in the strangest parts of the world. Most of
Yeah.
the time, they don't go to like recycling facilities. They don't go to like these um, industrial like composters essentially. They just end up anywhere in the world. And so our goal is that whatever garment uses our fibers will degrade in a microbe rich environment. So whether that's the soil, whether that's the ocean,
Mm.
that's the goal with our fibers. And I think that's like really important for like the coloring, because a lot of the times for like a thing like a cotton garment or like a linen,
Hmm.
after they use a lot of the synthetic dyes, most of those garments don't degrade anymore, and if they do, they leach super harsh chemicals back into our soil and our water systems. And so by us just cutting out that dyeing process and not having to go through that, really allows for our materials to degrade in a non-toxic way.
Mm. Mm. We are designing these materials with a intended end of life solution, but the realities of our supply chains just they don't ever get to that point of having they can have an extended life, but they'll end up in a landfill in Chile or in some landfill in Ghana, wherever it
Yeah.
might be. Um, and is the should material makers, should brands be thinking, what is the best end of life state in those conditions, i.e., be able to biodegrade in any context? Does that, this is a question for you, does that omit methane or other greenhouse gases that are really harmful? Um, any comments, thoughts on that component?
Yeah, I mean, textile recycling is huge, and
Mhm.
I think there is no like silver bullet for all of this. I think there's biodegradable things, but there also has to be this recycling because there is so much stuff already made,
Mhm.
and so there's like enough clothing for like the next, this might be wrong, but like the next like 5 to 6 generations already made in the world. It's insane. And so I think like the recycling is something that needs to be implemented much quicker. I think there is a lot of like government grants, and now that in the US it's giving that a really huge push. But it's something that is necessary. Like companies like Cirque, I'm like a huge fan of what they do.
Totally.
But it's necessary for these companies to scale because they are taking what is already made and giving it a second life, and that's extremely necessary. But I think for a lot of the new things that are being made, since there's already all this polyester and all this plastic that is already made, I think it's very important for this reliance on plastics to start to cut off, because we don't need to make it anymore. There's already enough of it already made for clothing. Plastic does have an application in more like industrial things and stuff like that, don't get me wrong. But for clothing, most of the time it's just used to make things cheaper, just to lower costs in a garment. And so ideally we start using more natural fibers or things that do degrade, but the recycling, it has to start kicking up much quicker. There's so much out there.
For sure. So on the topic of recycling, recycled textiles obviously make up a very, very small percentage of the total amount of materials made in the fashion or just textile space in general. But there are certain examples of small scale recycled textile success, primarily with protein-based fibers. And I'm thinking of factories and recycling plants in Italy, whether it be for cashmere or for wool and things like that. Again, they're small scale. The percentages is not really putting a big dent in the scheme of things, when most garments are made from a blend of polyester and cotton and other types of mixes. But because you're a protein-based material, I'm curious to know how. And you talk about biodegradability as a desired end of life, but what would Werewool's recyclability? Could it be recycled in the same process that a wool would be recycled? Is that something that you have put into consideration when it comes to designing the full life cycle of a Werewool based garment?
Yeah, we definitely have not tried seeing if it can recycle, but I do assume that it would be probably a similar process to like how a wool fiber is done. That is something that is like of high interest to us, because I would love to get that project started as soon as possible. But it's just with our limited funds and a small team, it's not something we've been able to devote time to. But it is something that I'm super interested in, because if you can recycle but also make it biodegradable, that is incredible.
Should biodegradability be the I guess on the hierarchy of end of life statuses? Is biodegradability in your eyes the top one, the one that all, not just Werewool, but other material manufacturers should aim for? Or does it vary depending on the material composition, whether it be protein-based or cellulose-based?
I think it depends. For me, like biodegradability is super important, but I know that for some people, recyclability is more important, just to continue keeping things in the cycle. But it just goes back to what I said earlier. I think like recyclability is incredible if we do have control over where things end up, and if take back systems are much better, and like sorting gets much better. But a lot of the times we don't get to that point, and it doesn't end up in like the sorting. I think like there is no silver bullet for this, but if sorting and all that stuff gets much better, then that would be like the way to go. But there's still like a little ways to get for both ends. So
what's your take on infinitely recyclable materials like a nylon 6, like an econyle, that promote this thinking of infinitely recyclable and reducing microplastic pollution in its process? Do you buy into that? Do you think that it's valid? Do you have any critiques on that?
No, I think it's definitely like a a stepping stone for it, because there is so much like fishing waste and all of that in the ocean already. So it is great that companies like Equinile are collecting it and giving it a second life. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and it's something that has a great story as well. So it connects with the consumer a lot, which is a really good way to get consumers interested in sustainability. And I think a lot of the times with a lot of these new fibers, and it's the story at the end of the day that will capture a consumer. So the storytelling there is really great. I think at the end of the day, things like nylon 6 and like Econal, they still release microplastics, and they still shed. But it is a step in the right direction. But there's more to do there, I think.
Yeah. Going back to something you said earlier that I wanna focus on is really the, if these systems down the line, down the value chain improve, then we have a better flow of materials, and obviously they get to that idealized end of life state. Um, what would you like to see the stakeholders next to you do better, to create a more environmentally friendly fashion industry? And for you, I'm assuming it's the manufacturer or it's the brand that's designing specifically with your materials. What advice would you give to your adjacent stakeholders in this value chain?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is for manufacturers and brands to commit to long-term purchasing orders or
Mhm.
offtakes, because that is what really moves the needle forward for companies like us. I think it's for like the longest time, so many of these companies, like startups like us, have been just stuck in like the capsule collection stage. And it's great for PR, it's great for the brand, but at the end of the day, for the startup, we usually do it at cost, and sometimes you even lose money during that, and we don't have a lot of money.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's hard, honestly. And so until like those large purchasing orders that are committed to like 10 years committed, or at least like 5 years committed, that really like moves the needle forward. And it also allows a company like us to get larger funding,
hmm
because with just small commitments like a couple kilograms or like 100 garments, it's still very hard to make a profit out of that.
mm
So that's what I think everyone wants the industry to do. And when you look at
right.
companies like Renewcell, that was a lot of the issues that they had, was that those purchasing orders that people had soft committed to just ended up not coming through, and then they had all this
hmm
financing that they had put in for building a plant and all of that,
hmm
and it things just fell apart. So it's like there's a lot of talk about sustainability, but it doesn't do much unless the financing is actually there. That's what really pushes things forward for everyone.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, What do you see? I guess this is in a parallel to that answer, but I'm curious to know what you think is the biggest obstacle to scaling your technology. Is it these larger purchase orders from these brands and commitments to material innovation, or is there other variables that sort of prevent you and other material innovators from scaling to a point where their amazing technology can make the impact that it theoretically could?
Yeah, I think one of our biggest obstacles that we are starting to tackle now is bioprocessing